I would like to apologize for not making any videos during the month of July. I was overwhelmed and drained, and I needed a reset. A lot of this is personal for me, and I'm also doing my best not to use spiteful or anti-anyone language and just stick to the actions that were taken. That means I sometimes have to rewrite the scripts if they lean towards sounding resentful. I am human, and I'm simply doing my best to be an ancestor my descendants will be proud of. So in this video, I will give an overview of what I found so far, and I will do my best to cite my sources. I noticed the cite your sources comment, and the reason I don't cite any sources is because the interpretations of the observations from the sources are mostly misleading and offensive, and they need to be cited with a lot of care. My objective is to ensure we discern an observation and an interpretation of that observation and avoid taking the interpretations as truth. I'm also finding that I have to explain when a source is an interpretation versus when it is an observation, and I also have to correct a lot of the spellings, which could make the videos longer, and I'm doing my best to keep them within 14 minutes. In addition, the sources have many misspellings, and if you don't understand the Proto-Bantu alphabet and don't know it, you will likely continue to get them wrong and misunderstand what was being heard, which is why I'm developing an app for the language, so I will let you know when the language app is done. A lot of the sources have personal opinions about what they were observing, and these opinions are not the kindest. They are rude, misleading, prejudiced, and offensive. Which is why I've been doing my best to understand how to be sensitive and specific about discerning observations from interpretation or opinion. But I will start sharing the sources starting with this video, and here's what I've found so far. It's really exciting. The word zanj was likely originally zang, ending with an ng and not NJ. Now, full disclosure, I got this data from ChatGPT, and it isn't always correct, and it still needs to be verified by a newer speaker. I hope I said that right. ChatGPT said Zang is a word for cattle in the Nuer language, which is a Nilo-Saharan language. So if anyone can verify this, it will be helpful in determining the correct etymology for this word. If it actually refers to cattle, then this phrase is connected to the Nilo-Saharan languages and not the Middle Eastern languages as previously attributed, and it is an African word. If Zang is from the Nuer language and is connected to cattle, then it becomes likely this is what they called themselves, the cattle people, because the Nilo-Saharan populations were nomadic cattle herders who amassed large herds of cattle and sometimes raided for the cattle, and this becomes important when we start to critically analyze what motivated them to move from the Sahara Belt down to the southern part of Africa and basically the whole of Africa, leading to a complete reorganization of Africa. The Nilo-Saharan nomadic lifestyle is unstable, and it seems to have been largely dependent on amassing as much cattle as possible because they did not farm or till the land, and they were highly dependent on cattle which they used for food and social status. So this means that they were always looking for ways to increase their herds. I was honestly shocked when I read a story about a Kenyan man offering Malia Obama 500 cattle for her dowry. I was like, where do they get all these cows from? We only get 12 to 14 max for our Luwano. The rest is our handsome singing and dancing while narrating their best qualities. But back to the cattle. This limited economy of cattle dependence and lack of diversification among the Nilo-Saharans created a dependency on their cattle, so their need for cattle likely induced them into raiding and invading populations that had cattle, such as the Proto-Bantu, who in addition to herding cattle, farmed, mined, smelted minerals, and were settled populations who also traded with the Far East, including India and China. The Nilo-Saharan need for cattle is actually documented in most of the raids in southern Africa by Shaga Mzilikazi, because they were primarily Nilo-Saharans who had invaded and occupied Proto-Bantu populations, and one of the recurring themes is how they always offered milk and beef to their guests, something that the Proto-Bantu don't do. We tend to offer buchwala, or chiwantu as it's called. It's this grain-based beer, and it's not really a beer. It's got a very low alcohol content, and children can drink it. I grew up drinking it, and the longer you keep it, the more it ferments and the higher the alcohol content. That's the general idea, and we've been making this forever, since we were made, I guess, and it's a very important part of our culture. And not seeing this practice in the primary sources helped me understand that these people were actually not Proto-Bantu. They were Nilo-Saharans, because they're the ones who offer milk and beef. And this need for cattle seems to have been the motivation for the arrangement they made with whoever they were working with. They took the cattle, and their sponsors or allies took the gold. And in addition to the cattle, they also had a practice of boiling the body parts of the monarchs and drinking the results, so they could embody the essence of their former rivals. And they also adopted the title of these people, which is why they sort of occupied these territories and subjugated the populations. Another interesting piece of information I found was in tracing the presence or the origins of the Damara, who seemed to form the other half of the Khoekhoe before they were Dutch. And the Khoekhoe were part Sun and part Damara, it seems, most likely Damara. The Damara are sort of just appear in southern Africa, and they spoke the same language as the Khoekhoe. So that tells us that these two groups are connected, and they spoke this language before the Khoekhoe spoke Cape Dutch. So when we trace some of the key words, we find these words spoken by the Gabele dialect. I say that the African way, but ChatGPT will say it's Gabil, and I just say it the African way, Gabele. And these are found in North Africa, specifically Algeria, and according to my research so far, they are the non-Arabized Berbers who are still fighting for their culture to be recognized. And we know this is an uphill battle, especially if they're fighting to stay non-Arabized. They seem to have been a part of or adjacent to the population of Africans who were often targeted for abduction by the Garamantes, because they were shorter in stature and shared a diet with the Mbuti people, who are also targets of slave raiders. And it could be that their stature was what the slave raiders were hunting for, because they were the people that could fit into the mining shafts, and so they were forced to mine the gold either in the west or in the south. And it fits that maybe the Nilo-Saharans and their Middle Eastern allies, who intended to own these resources, would target these people to work in these mines, because we do find evidence of skulls belonging to what they termed the Negro skull, and these people were often the people from the Mbuti and North African area, and they were often shorter in stature like the Damara are, and sometimes they were mixed with the sun, so this created the Khoekhoe people. So this could be where the Khoekhoe actually came from, and some of these remains have been found around mines in southern Africa. So that is just my theory right now. I am working on doing more research on that subject, so I will talk about it when I have more data. The next exciting find is personal to me, and this is about the Koya or Koya people, who are recorded as Koya with a G. We say Koya, who are largely ignored but are also a pivotal part of African history, especially shaping the Great Lakes and Southern African history. They were scattered by the invasions on their realm, which was called Shidima or Shindi. I have an uncle who is also named Shindi because his name is Mutondo, which is the title of the Koya monarch who ended up in Zambia as Mwene Mutondo. Mwene Mutondo is one of my maternal grandfathers, which is why this is so personal to me and exciting to find. Now, the Koya are part of the Proto-Bantu, and I know this because my grandmother told me, because this was her family, and they relocated from the Great Lakes just like the Subia did later on, but they relocated earlier around 900 AD. And this is a description of what they looked like according to David Livingstone. So it says, Livingstone tells us that a great many of the Vanai, which is their other name, are of a light coffee milk color, and indeed this color is considered handsome throughout the whole country, a fair complexion being as much a test of beauty with them as with us. That's a bad part. And this is the part that I'm talking about the sources and having prejudice and so on. But it goes on to say, as they draw out their hair into small cords a foot in length and entwine the inner bark of a certain tree round each separate cord, and dye the substance with a reddish color, many of them put me in mind of the ancient Egyptians. This is very important because this is also what the Suria Vaihuhane looked like, who are now predominantly found in Namibia. It is also what the Batonga Himanansa, the ones that came out of the Kami Matavele land ruins, looked like. And this is what made them targets too, because they were often targeted for the way they looked and their fair complexions. And this makes a lot of sense when you consider that the Nilo-Saharans were working with allies who are very prejudiced with skin complexion, and so the need to change their phenotype could have become embedded within their cultural fabric, and so they started to target and abduct women, especially from the Proto-Bantu, to sort of modify their phenotypes. And we know this because it happened to my grandmothers, and we have the history of it where they were abducted or forced to marry because they had features that these other people wanted, their abductors wanted. And by grandmothers, I mean it in the African sense, as in my grandmother's sisters are my grandmothers. So I just wanted to clarify that it happened to my grandmother's sisters, or not my immediate grandmother, but centuries back, 1800s, 1700s. This brings us to the end of this video. I will pick up from here in the next video. Thank you for watching, and thank you to all our coffee supporters. We appreciate your support. If you like this video, please like and subscribe for more.